The Israelites, descendants of the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, had resided in Egypt for many generations. Initially, they found favor in Egypt during the time of Joseph, who rose to prominence as a trusted advisor to Pharaoh. Joseph's leadership and foresight during a great famine earned the Israelites a place of refuge and prosperity in the land of Goshen. However, as generations passed, a new Pharaoh came to power who did not know Joseph. This Pharaoh observed the growing population and strength of the Israelites with concern and fear. Believing they might align with Egypt's enemies in times of war, he sought to suppress them. To weaken their influence and control their growth, the Pharaoh subjected the Israelites to harsh forced labor, turning them into slaves to build cities like Pithom and Ramses. Despite the oppression, the Israelite population continued to grow, which further alarmed Pharaoh. In a drastic attempt to curb their numbers, he decreed a chilling order. Every newborn Hebrew boy was to be thrown into the Nile River, sparing only the girls. This period of suffering and persecution marked a turning point in the history of the Israelites and set the stage for their eventual deliverance. This narrative highlights themes of resilience, faith, and the struggle for freedom, reflecting the deep historical and spiritual significance of this period in the story of the Israelites. Moses was born during a time when the Israelites faced severe oppression under Pharaoh's rule in Egypt. Pharaoh had issued a decree that all newborn Hebrew boys were to be killed, placing Moses' life in great danger. To protect her child, Moses' mother crafted a small basket from papyrus, sealed it with tar and pitch to make it waterproof, and placed her infant son inside. She then set the basket afloat on the Nile River, entrusting his fate to divine care. Moses' sister Miriam watched from a distance to see what would happen. Pharaoh's daughter, while bathing by the river, discovered the basket and was moved by the sight of the baby. Recognizing him as a Hebrew child, she decided to adopt him. Miriam approached her and suggested finding a Hebrew nurse for the baby, which allowed Moses' own mother to nurse and care for him during his early years. Eventually, Moses was brought to Pharaoh's palace, where he was raised as the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter, growing up in privilege while retaining knowledge of his Hebrew roots. As an adult, Moses witnessed the suffering of his people. One day, he saw an Egyptian overseer beating a Hebrew slave. Overcome with anger, Moses acted impulsively and killed the overseer. Realizing the consequences of his actions, Moses fled Egypt to avoid punishment. He sought refuge in the land of Midian, where he was welcomed by a family of shepherds led by Jethro, a local priest. Moses married Jethro's daughter, Zipporah, and settled into life as a shepherd, caring for flocks in the wilderness. This period of exile became a time of transformation, preparing Moses for his future role as a leader and deliverer of the Israelites. While tending his flock near Mount Horeb, also known as Mount Sinai, Moses encountered an extraordinary sight: a bush that was on fire but not consumed by the flames. Curious, he approached the bush to investigate this unusual phenomenon. As Moses drew closer, he heard a voice calling his name. It was the voice of God, speaking from within the burning bush. God identified himself as the God of Moses' ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He instructed Moses to remove his sandals, as the ground he was standing on was holy. God revealed that he had seen the suffering of the Israelites, who were living as slaves in Egypt. He explained his plan to rescue them from their oppression, and lead them to a land of freedom and prosperity. Described as flowing with milk and honey, God commanded Moses to return to Egypt and demand the release of the Israelites from Pharaoh. Moses, feeling unqualified and overwhelmed by the enormity of the task, expressed doubt about his ability to fulfill such a mission. He asked, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" God reassured Moses, promising that he would be with him and provide guidance every step of the way. To strengthen Moses' confidence, God revealed his sacred name, "I am who I am," emphasizing his eternal nature and divine authority. Still hesitant, Moses expressed concern about his speaking abilities. In response, God appointed Moses' brother, Aaron, to act as his spokesperson, ensuring that the message would be delivered clearly and effectively. This encounter marked a pivotal moment in Moses' life, transforming him from a shepherd into a leader chosen to guide his people to freedom. It also symbolized God's compassion and his willingness to work through ordinary individuals to accomplish extraordinary purposes. In the ancient land of Egypt, the Israelites, God's chosen people, lived in slavery under the rule of Pharaoh. After numerous warnings, Moses and his brother Aaron, guided by God's instructions, confronted Pharaoh with one simple command: "Let my people go." But Pharaoh refused. And so, God sent a series of 10 powerful plagues to show Pharaoh his authority and convince him to release the Israelites. Let's take a look at each of these 10 plagues. The first plague was water turning to blood. The once life-giving Nile River was transformed into blood. Fish died, and the water became undrinkable, crippling Egypt's daily life. Next, frogs overran Egypt. They filled the streets, homes, and even Pharaoh's palace. The frogs brought discomfort and chaos wherever they went. The third plague brought lice, or gnats, that infested the land, affecting both people and animals. No one was spared from the swarm. The fourth plague brought swarms of flies. They covered every surface, disturbing the people and making daily life unbearable. But in a sign of God's protection, the Israelites were spared from this plague. Then a disease struck Egypt's livestock. Cattle, horses, camels, and sheep all perished. This plague affected Egypt's economy and further weakened Pharaoh's hold over his people. The sixth plague brought painful boils, causing suffering to the Egyptians and their animals. Even Pharaoh's own advisors could not stand before Moses. The seventh plague was a fierce hailstorm, accompanied by fire. It destroyed crops and livestock, leaving Egypt's fields barren and devastated. The eighth plague brought locusts, who devoured whatever crops had survived the hailstorm. Egypt's land was left completely barren. For 3 days, a thick darkness covered Egypt. The people could not see or move, but in the land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived, there was light. The final and most devastating plague took the life of every firstborn in Egypt, from Pharaoh's own son to the lowest servant. Only the Israelites, who followed God's command to mark their doorposts with lamb's blood, were spared. The 10 plagues stand as a powerful testament to God's power and his commitment to his people. They also marked the beginning of the Israelites' journey to the Promised Land. After the devastating plagues, Pharaoh finally allowed the Israelites to leave Egypt. The Israelites, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, left in haste, carrying unleavened bread that had no time to rise. As they prepared to flee, God guided them on their journey with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, leading them safely through the wilderness. This divine guidance ensured they would not lose their way, even in the vast and unfamiliar desert. But Pharaoh soon regretted his decision. His heart was hardened once again. and he decided to pursue the Israelites with his army. Intent on bringing them back into slavery, the Israelites found themselves trapped between the Red Sea and Pharaoh's advancing army. But God had a plan. Moses, following God's command, raised his staff over the waters. God parted the Red Sea, creating a dry path for the Israelites to walk through. The waters stood like walls on either side. As the people hurried across to safety, Pharaoh's army followed, rushing into the parted sea with chariots and soldiers, believing they could overtake the fleeing Israelites. But once the Israelites had safely crossed, God commanded Moses to stretch out his hand once more. As he did, the waters of the Red Sea returned to their normal position, crashing down on the Egyptian army. The waters drowned Pharaoh's army, and the Israelites were saved. This miracle marked a pivotal moment in their journey, securing their freedom and showing God's power and protection. The Israelites had been delivered from slavery in Egypt, and their journey to the Promised Land had begun. With the Red Sea behind them, they were one step closer to the freedom God had promised them. This moment of divine intervention at the Red Sea not only marked the physical escape of the Israelites from Egypt, but also demonstrated God's unwavering faithfulness to his people. After their miraculous escape from Egypt, the Israelites journeyed through the wilderness toward the Promised Land. Their journey led them to the foot of Mount Sinai, a sacred place where God would reveal his laws and establish a covenant with his people. Here, at Mount Sinai, Moses ascended the mountain to meet with God. In this powerful encounter, God would provide Moses with the laws that would guide the lives of the Israelites. As Moses approached the summit, the mountain was enveloped in a dense cloud. Thunder and lightning filled the sky, and the sound of a trumpet grew louder, as if all of nature itself was responding to the presence of God. The people trembled in fear, for they knew they were in the presence of something divine. This was a moment of great holiness and awe. On the mountain, God gave Moses the 10 Commandments, inscribed on 2 stone tablets. These commandments were not just laws. They were the foundation of the covenant between God and his people. They were designed to guide the Israelites in how to live in harmony with God and with one another. The 10 Commandments included key principles for the Israelites to follow. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourselves an idol. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Honor your father and mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet. With the giving of the 10 Commandments, God established a covenant with the Israelites. This covenant was an agreement, a promise, where God pledged to be their God, and they in turn pledged to follow his laws. The commandments became the foundation of Israelite society, shaping their relationship with God and one another. The laws given at Mount Sinai would guide not just their religious practices, but every aspect of their lives. Through the covenant, God called the Israelites to be a holy nation, set apart to worship and serve him. These laws emphasized justice, mercy, and faithfulness, and they laid the groundwork for Israel's future as a community dedicated to God's will. The covenant at Mount Sinai was a pivotal moment in the history of the Israelites. It marked the beginning of their identity as God's chosen people, bound by a set of sacred laws that would guide them toward the Promised Land. Through the 10 Commandments, the Israelites would learn what it meant to live according to God's will, a legacy that continues to inspire faith and morality to this day. After the Israelites left Egypt, they were set on a journey to the Promised Land. But due to their disobedience and lack of faith in God's promises, their journey would not be a quick one. Instead of entering the land right away, they were led into the wilderness, where they would wander for 40 years. The Israelites, though they had witnessed God's power in Egypt, quickly began to doubt his ability to provide for them. They grumbled against Moses and Aaron, longing for the comforts of Egypt. They even complained about the lack of food and water, forgetting that God had promised to take care of them. In response to their complaints, God provided manna from heaven, small, bread-like flakes that appeared on the ground each morning. This manna was a daily provision that sustained the Israelites through their journey. They were to gather just enough for each day, trusting God to provide for them daily. Along with manna, God also sent quail in the evening, providing the Israelites with meat. And when they were thirsty, God commanded Moses to strike a rock, from which water flowed to quench their thirst. Though the Israelites were often faithless and rebellious, God remained faithful. Day after day he provided food, water, and guidance. The cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night were constant reminders of his presence with them, guiding them toward the promised land. The wilderness was not just a place of physical hardship, but also a place of spiritual testing. God used this time to shape and refine his people, teaching them to rely on him fully. But time and time again, they struggled to trust God's provision. Their lack of faith led to more rebellion and further delays in their journey. For 40 long years, the Israelites wandered in the wilderness. That generation who had doubted God's promises would not be allowed to enter the promised land. Instead, they would wander until a new generation, one that would trust in God, arose. Though the Israelites faced hardship and loss during these 40 years, God was preparing them for something greater. The wilderness was a time of discipline and growth, shaping them into a people ready to inherit the promised land. Despite their failures, God's covenant with the Israelites remained. His faithfulness never wavered, and he would soon bring them to the land he had promised their forefathers. The lessons learned in the wilderness, trusting in God's provision, obeying his commands, and relying on his faithfulness, would be the foundation of their new life in the land of Canaan. The Exodus is not just a historical event. It is central to the identity and faith of the Jewish people. This story, the liberation of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, has shaped their collective memory and serves as a symbol of God's faithfulness and power. Every year, Jewish people around the world commemorate the Exodus through the celebration of Passover. This festival, one of the most important in the Jewish calendar, recalls God's miraculous deliverance of the Israelites from Pharaoh's tyranny. During the Passover Seder, families retell the story of their ancestors' escape from Egypt, affirming their faith in God's enduring covenant with his people. The foods eaten during the Seder, unleavened bread, bitter herbs, and lamb, serve as symbols of the hardship and suffering endured by the Israelites, as well as the joy of their ultimate deliverance. The story of the Exodus is passed down through generations, keeping the memory of God's faithfulness alive in the hearts of the Jewish people. For Christians, the story of the Exodus holds profound spiritual significance. It is often seen as a symbol of salvation, representing God's power to deliver his people from the bondage of sin, just as he freed the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. The Exodus foreshadows the salvation that Christians believe was brought through Jesus Christ. Just as Moses led the Israelites to freedom, Christ is believed to have led humanity to salvation through his death and resurrection. The themes of liberation, redemption, and divine intervention in the Exodus story resonate deeply in Christian teachings. The Exodus is a powerful testament to the strength of faith and perseverance in the face of oppression. Moses, called by God, confronted Pharaoh and demanded the freedom of his people. Despite the obstacles, God's power and promises never failed. The Israelites, though often doubtful and rebellious, were ultimately freed through God's intervention. The story of the Exodus shows God's ability to deliver his people from the most dire circumstances. Through miraculous acts, the plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, and the guidance in the wilderness, God demonstrated his sovereignty over all things. These acts were not just for the Israelites, but also for the world to witness God's unmatched power and grace.
Thanks for watching. Stay connected with us for more exciting history and captivating stories right here on Documentary Vault. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to never miss an update. See you in the next episode.